So, should the UK send British troops into Ukraine? Controversial question. Email me your thoughts to dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews. You can vote in my poll there too. But to debate this first, I'm joined by the Conservative MP, Alicia Cairns, former Army, Infantry and Intelligence Officer Henry Bolton, OBE, and former senior British military advisor to US Central Command, Major General Chapman. Alicia, do you think the Prime Minister was hinting there that there is the possibility that British troops could be on the ground at some point in this conflict?
I have to say, I don't think that's what his intention was to say, but I think it was incredibly vague and therefore we could have taken it either way. But I think we have to remember that every public statement he makes is part of the chess game that we're playing with Putin. And so it's very important that we don't necessarily shut down avenues too early for fear of what that would tell Putin that we are willing or not willing to do.
And Henry Bolton, you think troops on the ground could be potential?
I think what we've got to keep in mind is not just what we do, it's why we're doing it. And we cannot allow Putin to succeed here. He and the Russian army and Russia cannot gain a benefit from this action. And if it looks as though that's going to be the case, I would say that we need to enforce a no-fly zone, at least to the west of the river Dnieper, which is the big sort of blue mark. Anybody can see it on a map of Ukraine, pretty much down the centre of it. And if necessary, as well, put a NATO armoured division or a couple of brigades in the far west of the country as a sign that we are not going to let Putin succeed here. We need to bolster the Ukrainian army. It's for the Ukrainians to do the fighting. But if we need to give them that edge on the battlefield, then we need to look seriously at how we do it. Because Putin will have factored in the sanctions, 100% he will, the worst case sanctions for Russia. And he has decided, having looked at that worst case scenario, that he is prepared to deal with that. He can take that on. And so our sanctions are not going to stop what's happening. And it's happening quite quickly. We must make sure he doesn't succeed.
Major General Chapman, you don't think it's likely that British troops will be engaged?
Well, your answer at the macro level came today, but from our the biggest alliance partner. So Adam Schiff in the House Intelligence Committee today said that I don't think there's a situation where we'll ever see American boots on the ground. If Americans say that, we're likely to follow their lead at the moment. So the answer to that is no. But what we are doing, we're at the moment doing Iron Surge, which is the armoured battle group which has just been trained in Germany, because my son was there with them, and is moving as we speak to reinforce the Estonian Enhanced Forward Presence battle group. Really, we've got the containment line now, which is going to run from the intermaritime countries, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, and that is where the stop line will be. It might be that we might do things later on to put things on the ground, but at the moment, the case for that is niet. I think more likely, and what was really interesting today and what happened in Moscow, is asking some Muscovites last week if there would be a war and Russia would invade Ukraine. The answer was Kanishna niet. Of course not, stupid, is that line. They couldn't believe that because of what they'd been fed by Putin. So I think the collapse internally of Russia, Putin's position, if this doesn't go well, is more of a gamble for him than a risk in the long term if there is a war after the war from the Ukrainians. And of course, it is not, as I keep saying, armies that fight wars, it's nations that fight wars. And as long as the political polity is there and there's the will of the Ukrainian people to fight, then they have a chance.
Alessia, you think air support should be considered?
I do, because I think nothing should be off the table. The difficulty for me is, and I don't know if the two gentlemen agree with me, but when you come from a past where you're used to having intelligence to hand, I'm not inclined to say for definite that we should be putting in place a no-fly zone, because I don't have the intelligence to prove it to be effective. But also, like Chip, I'm not convinced that we're ready to put British troops at risk. No. And we would have to deploy air support solely if we were happy that essentially they would shoot down British airmen and airwomen. And I'm not convinced that's something we're happy to do. And I think also if we were to do it, we would have to do it with all our NATO allies. This is not something you do on your own. And again, I'm absolutely just not certain that we would have that support from our NATO allies to go in and maintain a no-fly zone.
And Alessia, are you hearing much from your constituents on this? Because most folk who I speak to seem to be steadfast that they don't want the government to risk British lives.
So I have to say, constituents haven't really mentioned specifically whether they don't want British troops to go in, but they have been absolutely resolute that they want a strong response. They've been absolutely behind economic sanctions. And I think I've obviously been particularly forward-leaning in terms of saying that if we don't see sanctions result in behaviour change from Putin, I want to see offensive cyber strikes deployed, and I want to see further escalations from that point onwards. And what has been incredibly clear was that constituents have given me their full backing to deploy the full hybrid arsenal that we have to hand.
Henry Bolton, how did we get here in the first place? What is it about the West's actions since 2014 that gave Putin the confidence to act in this manner?
Well, that's a complex answer to your quite simple question, Dan. There's a history to this. It's all about the character and the perceptions and the worldview, if you like, of the Russian people, the Russian government, Putin himself, and all of that. And one has to understand that. I don't think particularly the European Union has been very good at understanding that and appreciating that the Russian government does have a different worldview. But at the end of the day here, however naive and however badly we've handled this over months or years, there is absolutely no justification whatsoever for the Russian army to be going into Ukraine. Absolutely none. There were other solutions. Even if Putin, even hypothetically, if we said that Putin had a case in terms of something going on in the Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, there were other mechanisms that Russia is part of that could have been employed to solve that problem. He has not wanted to. This is not about anything like that. This is about Putin wanting his own sort of doctrine and his own sort of almost religious ideology that Russia or Ukraine should never have left the Russian fold, if you like. And he doesn't want a successful, sort of democratic, booming economy of Slavs who are very, very closely related to the Russians on his doorstep, because then the Russians will look at that. I mean, one of the things about Russia and Ukraine is that they are very, very close. There are people who are living in Russia who've got one or other parent who was born in Ukraine. They're very, very close. And if Ukraine was booming and Russia's not, it's going to look very bad for Putin. So there's a whole lot there. But I cannot accept that there is any justification, however naive and however badly things have been handled, going back to way before 2014 and the Maidan. There was a lot of naivety, and I think there still is a lack of understanding of the Russian people and the Russian sort of government's mentality that has contributed towards all this. But there is absolutely, we've got to be very, very clear on that. There are lessons to be learned, but there is no justification whatsoever. That doesn't justify Putin going in and doing what he's done now.
Well, no.
Absolutely not.
And
he's
also
visiting extreme violence on the Ukrainians and harming his own nation.
Indeed.
He cannot be forgiven for that.
Major General Chapman, whatever you think about the mistakes we've made over the past few years, and of course we've made mistakes in our dealings with Russia, it was chilling to hear Putin threaten nuclear war at 5:55 a.m. Moscow time this morning. Do you think he's lost the plot, or do you think these are threats?
Well, firstly, I don't think he threatened nuclear war. What I think people have done, commentators, is had their minds hacked. He didn't say that at all. But of course, that's people go to the maximalist position. So we need to put that in context. There are two parts, I think, of the multi-domain operations which could be escalatory and which we and they could use. The first one is we don't know what would occur in cyberspace should we go to what he might think or we might think is a NATO Article 5, particularly if you sort of degrade, deny and then destroy, which is possible in cyber. And Jeremy Fleming said that in his Singapore speech in February 19. And the other one, of course, is that we will continue to give intelligence to Ukraine, not from air breathers, that's the intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft, which have been circling day after day in massive numbers over the last few weeks, which have laid down the sort of order of battle of Russia, but from satellites. So there is a theory that the Russians, for example, because of that interference, might either dazzle, jam, or ultimately destroy American satellites. That would lead space debris and all that. Both of those things, the cyber and interference in space, because land, sea, and air operations are not the only three domains that we talk about now, could actually lead to an Article 5 operation. But Article 5, of course, is any time that the politicians say it is.
OK. Fascinating insight from all of you. That's Major General Chapman, former senior British military advisor to US Central Command, who also served in Russia in 1993. Before that, the Conservative MP Alessia Cairns and the former Army Infantry and Intelligence Officer Henry Bolton, OBE. Thank you all. So who do you agree with?